Hey guys, tonight we drift into a version of ancient Rome. Most textbooks politely avoid the one where the air itself could make you feel a little lighter, a little stranger, and sometimes a little too relaxed for your own good. You step into a crowded Roman street, sandals scraping dusty stones, and almost immediately the city breathes on you. Thick, warm vapors slide past your face. Some come from incense stalls, some from bathhouse chimneys, and some from things you really hope are incense but probably aren't. You feel your senses soften just a touch, and you already know. You probably won't survive this place without getting at least a tiny whiff of something you didn't plan on. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fun seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe. Turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep walking straight ahead, moving through Rome in the present tense, as if your footsteps matter here. The smells thicken. A smoky plume drifts from a brazier outside a temple, resins burning with a sweet, almost syrupy scent. Romans used incense for religion, yes, but also because they believed certain aromatic woods calmed nerves and dulled pain. Historians still argue whether some of these mixtures genuinely had mild sedative effects, or whether it was the power of suggestion in a society already steeped in ritual. Either way, you feel the air get heavier, like it's wrapping around your shoulders. A few steps later, you pass a stall selling what looks like bundles of herbs bound with twine. The vendor waves one under your nose before you can object, and suddenly you're hit with a smell that's floral, spicy, and slightly numbing. It's not dangerous. It's basically an ancient form of aromatherapy, a mainstream fact of Roman life. Chamomile, lavender, and even crushed bay leaves were used to ease anxiety long before modern wellness influencers trademarked the idea. Romans didn't have essential oil diffusers, but they had open flames and a lot of confidence, which is sometimes the same thing. But then comes something quirkier. You notice a cloud of steam rising from a sewer grate. Rome's enormous drainage system often vented warm, sulfurous fumes that people swore had strange effects on mood. Some ancient writers claimed these vents softened the mind or made people drowsy. Whether that meant chemical influence or just the psychological effect of walking past a hot, smelly hole in the ground is unclear, but you definitely feel your senses wobble just for a second. One light joke for the road. Congratulations, you've just inhaled your first accidental Roman sewer sauna experience. Most tourists don't get the premium package. As you move deeper into the Subura, a lively and slightly chaotic neighborhood, you notice small clouds of incense drifting from tenement balconies. Residents couldn't afford fancy perfumes, so they burned whatever they had: pine resin, rosemary, sage. The smoke rolled down the walls and into the streets. It wasn't meant to intoxicate anyone. It was meant to mask the scent of your neighbor's fish stew or the tannery 2 streets over. Still, some of these herbs, when burned, can have subtle, calming effects. You're basically walking through ancient Rome's version of someone leaving a scented candle burning in their apartment hallway. You slip to the side as a group of young men stomp past, laughing, each carrying a chunky lump of what looks like yellowish resin. They toss one piece onto a street brazier. It pops, hisses, and releases a warm, honey-thick smoke. This is frankincense, expensive, imported, beloved by the wealthy, and sometimes borrowed by the not-so-wealthy for moments. Exactly like this. Frankincense was believed to clear the mind, lift mood, and help people think on a higher plane. Whether that was biochemical or psychological is still up for debate, but you do notice the air feels strangely floaty. And no, it's not just because you skipped lunch. Here's another mainstream historical fact for you. Roman streets were filled with the aroma of pitch, tar, and burning oil. These were practical, they fueled lamps and sealed boats, but breathing them all day didn't exactly improve cognitive function. Ancient writers mention head swimming or soft-headedness after long exposure, which today we'd probably chalk up to fumes no one should breathe in regularly. But back then, it was simply life. You feel a tiny imaginary headache forming, which is historically accurate and therefore allowed. And now for the quirky tidbit. You notice a perfumer's shop nearby, its doorway draped with heavy cloth to keep the scented smoke inside. You sneak a peek anyway. Inside, the perfumer is heating a mix of myrtle, cinnamon, and a mystery ingredient that glitters like crushed gold. Some Romans believed certain shimmering powders, when heated, released elevating vapors that opened the mind. Modern scholars think this may have been powdered galbanum or resin with naturally shiny flecks, but historians still argue whether the vapors actually had a measurable effect or whether Romans just liked sparkly things. Hard to blame them. You take a breath, one that's a blend of incense, herbs, smoke, and bustling life, and you realize ancient Rome isn't simply noisy or crowded. It's aromatic in a way that modern cities aren't. The air is layered. Every step carries a scent meant to soothe, distract, purify, impress, or sometimes just hide something that absolutely needs hiding. And even though none of this is meant to get you high in the modern sense, the combined sensory overload can leave you feeling lightheaded, dreamy, or pleasantly off-kilter. One last gentle joke: if you're starting to feel a little floaty yourself, don't worry, it's just the power of imagination, and possibly the mental equivalent of walking through a candle store with poor ventilation. The street curves ahead, more smells wait around the corner, and without announcing a new chapter, the night simply pulls you forward. You drift onward, leaving the smoky streets behind, and Rome opens into a brighter plaza where the air changes again. The fumes of incense fade, replaced by something fruitier, sweet, sharp, and unmistakably fermented. You're approaching one of the city's busiest tavern clusters, and even from a distance, you can tell the Romans have a very flexible definition of what counts as just wine. You slow your steps because, honestly, the smell alone is a whole experience. A jug clinks against another, and a tavern keeper ladles out a cup of deep red liquid for a customer. Roman wine. It wasn't meant to be sipped with quiet dignity. It was meant to be mixed, altered, improved, softened, sweetened, or sometimes obliterated with spices so strong you'd swear someone emptied an entire modern spice rack into the pot. One mainstream fact: Roman wine was almost always diluted with water, flavored with herbs, or heated. Drinking it plain was considered barbaric, so the cup you're watching slosh around isn't a simple beverage. It's more like a constantly evolving kitchen experiment. You ease closer, catching a whiff of cinnamon and honey syrup. The tavern keeper stirs the pot again, and steam curls upward like a lazy ribbon. A man next to you nudges his friend and jokes that this batch is strong enough to make the Senate seem reasonable, which is probably the ancient equivalent of saying, "Buddy, this is going to hit fast." But don't worry, we're keeping this PG-13. Tonight, you're observing, not sipping. Your only job is to survive the aromas. Another passerby walks by with a clay jug hanging from his belt, the stopper stained purple. You overhear him bragging that his wine includes extracts from local herbs meant to warm the chest and loosen the mind. Historians still argue whether these additives had noticeable effects or were just part of Rome's obsession with tinkering. Ancient writers describe countless recipes: honeyed wine, resin-infused wine, rose petal wine, myrtle wine, fennel wine. It's like every Roman household had its own signature concoction, and every cook believed theirs was the one that cured everything from stress to stomach aches. You pass a set of low wooden tables filled with workers finishing their day. One man swirls his cup and proudly announces he added pitch to his wine this morning. You pause. Pitch sounds like something you use to seal a boat, not flavor a drink. And that's because it is. The quirky historical tidbit here: Romans sometimes added resin or pitch to give wine a smoky, tangy bite. It also helped preserve it. Did it change how people felt? Possibly, but not because it did anything mystical. It was just strong and strange enough to fool your senses into thinking something special was happening. In that way, ancient Rome unintentionally invented psychological special effects. A tavern boy bumps into you and apologizes while holding a tray of drinks so fragrant you can practically taste the herbs in the air. You smell thyme, maybe a little rosemary, and definitely something sweet like dates. You watch him hand the cups to a group of women at a nearby table. They're laughing, talking fast, and one of them lifts her cup to the lamplight, admiring the golden tint. You can tell she's trying to figure out exactly what's in it. Romans loved the mystery of mixed wine, the buzz of guessing. It's basically the ancient version of asking, "Wait, what did you put in this smoothie?" You catch a nearby conversation between two older men, debating the best way to heat wine. One insists that wine should be warmed with embers, never flame, because flame burns the spices. The other claims the best flavor only comes from boiling. Historians still argue whether boiling wine actually intensified its effects, or simply made it sweeter and easier to drink in large quantities. Either way, You get the sense that Romans turned winemaking into full-blown personality politics. The crowd shifts, and you catch sight of a more upscale establishment across the plaza, a private dining room for wealthier patrons. You peek inside from the doorway. The wine here is brighter, clearer, strained through cloth to remove sediments. The host drizzles in a little imported resin from the east, a luxury item meant to create a floral aroma. He talks about it the way a modern barista talks about coffee notes: passion, intensity, a hint of performance art. You're amused that no matter the century, people will always find new ways to flex with their thighs. Drinks. You step back outside, and a gust of evening wind sends the scent of wine-soaked amphorae drifting across the plaza. A few empty jugs sit in the alley, their clay paws still releasing faint fruity notes. Amphorae were porous, absorbing layers of aroma over time. Some scholars suggest that reused amphorae added subtle flavors to new batches poured into them, like the world's oldest version of a seasoned pan. Whether this actually altered mood or just taste is a matter of debate, but you find it charming that even Rome's garbage had a fragrance profile. A man nearby is gossiping loudly about a new tavern that supposedly mixes wine with exotic spices from India. He claims the blend opens the mind and loosens dreams. Another guy laughs and tells him that's nonsense, but then leans in closer, just in case it isn't. One thing remains clear. Romans loved the idea that certain ingredients could elevate a simple drink into a semi-magical experience. They didn't need scientific proof. They needed a good story. And they always delivered. You walk past a wall graffitied with a rough drawing of a wine jug and the words, "Best dreams start here." It's not subtle, but it's very on-brand for Rome. You wonder whether ancient taverns had the same advertising confidence as modern coffee shops. Try our new blend, you'll feel things. As you leave the plaza, the scent of wine fades behind you, replaced by the cool night air. The Romans weren't secret chemists, but they absolutely believed the right combination of herbs, spices, and heat could shift your mood. Sometimes it really did. Sometimes it only felt like it did. Either way, you're walking through a city where even the drinks blur the edges of the ordinary. And without pausing or announcing anything, the night simply guides you deeper into Rome's next set of strange aromas and stranger habits. You leave the bustle of the tavern district behind and slip into a tavern, the quieter stretch of Rome, where the streets narrow, the lamps dim, and the scents become more personal, less public spectacle, more household experiment. Here, the air carries gentle hints of herbs drifting out of open windows. You're stepping into the world of ordinary Roman kitchens, where families weren't trying to party, impress guests, or outdo their neighbors. They were simply making the kinds of herbal brews people believed could calm nerves, ease pain, or nudge the mind into soft, dreamy corners. Nothing dangerous, just the sleepy chemistry of everyday life. A woman crouches at her doorway, sorting bundles of dried plants. She glances up and gives you the kind of polite half-smile that says, "Yes, I'm working with leaves again. And no, I'm not going to explain them." On her mat sit bowls of chamomile, mint, fennel, and something with a peppery scent you can't quite place. One mainstream fact: Romans regularly brewed herbal infusions to treat headaches, stomach troubles, sleeplessness, and stress. They didn't think of these as getting high, they thought of them as medicine. Mild medicine, at that. Inside her home, you see a clay kettle simmering on a low brazier. Steam lifts upward, carrying that same peppery scent. She lifts a lid, adds a pinch of something green, then gives the pot a slow stir. This blend, according to Roman household manuals, might be intended to clear heaviness from the mind. Whether it worked is another story. But the ritual alone probably helped people unwind after a long day of carrying water, cooking, grinding grain, or arguing with neighbors about who stole their laundry line, classic Roman issues. As you walk deeper into the alley, you pass a group of older men sitting on low stools, each holding a steaming cup. They're sipping something pale and herbal, chatting in calm voices. One says his brew includes crushed celery seeds for clarity. Another swears by thyme steeped with honey. The third says his son-in-law drinks dill tea to see dreams more clearly, which might just be ancient dad speak for "my son-in-law sleeps a lot." Historians still argue whether some of these homemade infusions had any noticeable mind-altering properties beyond relaxation. Most were mild, harmless, and probably comforting, but a few plants like wild lettuce or certain night-blooming herbs could bring a light drowsiness. Nothing dramatic, certainly nothing cinematic, more like the warm, fuzzy feeling you get after sipping a slightly too strong cup of bedtime tea. You round another corner and find a small kitchen garden behind a modest home. Lavender bushes nestle against a stone wall, their scent drifting in the night air. A woman gently crushes a few blossoms between her fingers, releasing more fragrance. She explains to her friend that putting lavender in warm water helps calm the mind. You already feel calmer just from the aroma passing by. If this were a modern YouTube thumbnail, it would say something like, "Ancient Roman hacks for better sleep." Surrounded by sparkles and a very relaxed cartoon Roman, a quirky little moment catches your eye. A boy dangling a bundle of mint over a pot of boiling water while pretending he's a powerful magician brewing a secret potion. His mother sighs, gently sets the mint upright, and tells him to stop summoning the household spirits. He insists he isn't. He is absolutely lying. And mint steam, the good news, is perfectly safe. You wander to another doorway where an elderly man is preparing something stronger smelling. He crushes a root with a stone pestle, mixes it with warm wine, and adds a spoon of honey. He calls it a remedy for chest tightness, but admits it also makes the mind float lightly. He raises an eyebrow, not in a scandalous way, but as if to say, yes, it's cozy. No, it won't cause chaos. Even in ancient Rome, people knew the difference between a calming drink and something genuinely harmful. You step inside for a moment. The room is dim but warm, lit by a small oil lamp. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters like a tiny suspended forest. The air is thick with the scents of rosemary, sage, and something earthy. An old woman sits by the hearth, tying twine around dried leaves. She tells you stories quietly about how rural farmers used to bring her plants they thought were enchanted, simply because they grew near crossroads or bloomed at odd hours. Here's your quirky tidbit of the section. Some Romans believed herbs harvested during certain moon phases had stronger effects. Urban householders weren't as superstitious as rural folk, but little beliefs still slipped into city routines. One family might insist chamomile harvested at dawn brought gentler dreams, while another believed mint cut under moonlight relieved sadness faster. Historians still argue whether any of these timing traditions had actual impact or were just charming rituals passed down through generations. You watch a homeowner pour a cup of herby steam water into a small bowl, setting it beneath her bed. She says the vapors help her sleep. It's basically the ancient Roman version of put eucalyptus on your nightstand, and honestly, it feels relatable. As you exit the alley, the combined scents of all those kitchens cling to your clothes, warm, sweet, peppery, calming. You realize that while Rome had its wilder, louder ways of altering moods, the everyday household brews were far more common. They weren't chasing euphoria, they were chasing comfort. And without pausing, the night nudges you toward the next corner of Rome's quietly intoxicating world. You leave the cozy household kitchens behind and follow the curve of a quiet Roman street until the noise thins out and the lamps grow sparser. The air feels cooler here, carrying a faint mineral scent, almost metallic. You're approaching one of Rome's many small temples, shrines that weren't about crowds or spectacle, but about dreams, calm, and that gentle, drifting feeling you get right before sleep. These places promised insight, not intoxication. But the methods? Well, they involved a lot of vapors. You step through a narrow stone archway, and instantly the temperature shifts. Cool night air gives way to warm pockets of fragrant mist. Someone inside has been burning herbs for hours, letting them pool along the floor like invisible waves. One mainstream fact: dream incubation seeking answers or healing through sleep was common in parts of the Roman world. People would sleep in sanctuaries dedicated to gods like Asclepius, hoping to receive visions. The idea wasn't mystical for them, it was spiritual therapy before therapy existed. A priest in light linen walks past you, carrying a bronze bowl with smouldering herbs. The smoke curls upward like pale ribbons, leaving a faint sweetness in its wake. He doesn't acknowledge you directly. These temples were meant to be quiet, almost whisper-like. You inhale just enough to catch hints of bay leaf, myrrh, maybe a little thyme. These aren't get-high fumes, they're relaxation fumes, the ancient world's version of dim the lights and let aromatherapy do its thing. You can feel your shoulders lower a bit without meaning to. In the center of the shrine lies a long stone bench, surrounded by shallow braziers. A woman sits on the edge, palms resting on her knees, letting the warmth rise around her. She's here seeking guidance for an illness in her family. hoping a dream will tell her which remedy to try next. The priest fans the braziers gently, sending another wave of herbs toward her. Historians still argue whether these mixtures had actual sedative properties or whether the calm environment alone helped people fall into deeper, more symbolic sleep. Either way, dreams in this setting felt heavier, louder, more meaningful. A quirky detail floats by your ears. 2 acolytes are whispering about the temple snakes. These shrines often kept harmless holy snakes that wandered the floors at night, not because they were mystical stress balls, but because Romans believed snakes symbolized healing. You glance down, half expecting to see one, and instantly regret looking. Thankfully, the floor is clear. Still, you can't shake the idea that any moment now, something cool and scaly might slither across your foot, which is probably why dream seekers here slept very still. In a dim corner, you notice another worshipper lying on a woven mat. A thin cloth covers their body, and a priest quietly waves smoke over their head using a fan made from palm leaves. The movement is slow, rhythmic, hypnotic, like watching someone fan a campfire without letting the flames rise. The scent drifting off the bowl is different from the others, woodsy, resinous, and slightly sharp. Some temples used juniper or laurel, believing the scent cleansed the inner thoughts. Whether it did anything more than relax people remains a mystery, but the ritual itself feels incredibly soothing. You walk further inside, where a wall of carved reliefs shows worshippers lying on mats, eyes closed, gods leaning over them in dreams. Some carvings are detailed enough to show little bowls placed near sleepers' heads, likely filled with warm water or lightly scented oils. This was Rome's version of a diffuser, minus the USB plug and influencer discount code. It's surprisingly peaceful, and you find yourself slowing your breathing to match the rhythm of the flickering temple lamps. A priestess approaches a small pot near the wall, uncaps it, and mixes its contents with steaming water. A soft hiss fills the air as she stirs. She explains to another visitor that this blend is meant to lighten the spirit. It includes crushed herbs, a bit of honey, and possibly some floral resin brought from the eastern provinces. She insists it encourages gentle dreams. The visitor nods, though the look on her face says she already has plenty of dreams, she's just hoping for better ones. Historians still argue whether these temple brews varied from place to place or followed consistent recipes. The surviving texts contradict each other in charmingly chaotic ways. Behind you, someone gently coughs as a new wave of incense drifts past. It's not overwhelming, but you suddenly understand why dream incubation worked so well. The atmosphere is soft, warm, and utterly unlike the noise of daily Roman life. No taverns shouting, no carts rattling down stone roads, just quiet breathing, slow ritual movements, and enough fragrant haze to make anyone feel like they're floating, a few inches above the floor. You approach the inner chamber, where a low pool reflects the flickering firelight. Pilgrims were sometimes asked to wash their hands or face before sleeping, symbolically washing away anxious thoughts. A young man dips his fingers into the water, takes a breath, and says he hopes the night will show him what path to take in his career. The priest nods, offering a small bowl of steamed herbs to set beside him. The scent is earthy and soothing. If dreams had a flavor, it would probably smell like this. As you step back toward the entrance, one final wave of smoke drifts across your face, warm and calming. These temples weren't places to get wild or lose control. They were sanctuaries where Romans indulged in rituals that gently shifted their inner worlds. Not highs, just hush. And as you step outside, the cooler night air brushes your skin, guiding you seamlessly onward through Rome's quietly altering landscape. You leave the soft, drifting haze of the Dream Temple behind, and the moment you step back into the night, the atmosphere shifts again. Rome is never one mood for long. The quiet, spiritual warmth dissolves into something louder, brighter torches, rising laughter, clapping hands, distant flute music. You're moving toward a celebration, and not just any celebration. You're approaching a Bacchic gathering, one of those festivals Romans alternated between embracing, regulating, and side-eyeing with the intensity of someone watching their neighbor throw a suspiciously quiet house party. The air thickens with a warm, fruity aroma, heated wine blended with herbs, spices, and whatever else the host thought would impress everyone. And no, before your imagination wanders too far, we're staying safe and historical here. Bacchic parties weren't wild chemical carnivals. They were social events where the line between relaxation and too much relaxation got fuzzy, mostly because Romans kept inventing new wine. variations like they were auditioning for the role of history's first beverage influencers. A mainstream fact to ground you: Bacchus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and seasonal renewal, inspired festivals that were originally tamed just singing, dancing, vines, and communal joy. But over time, some celebrations developed reputations for dramatic flair. Whether these reputations were exaggerated by suspicious politicians is still debated. Historians still argue whether the more intense Bacchic rites were commonplace or rare sensationalized outliers. Romans loved gossip almost as much as they loved sauce. You step closer, feeling the hum of drums beneath your feet. People dance in loose circles, stamping out rhythms that echo against the stone. They're holding cups of heavily spiced wine so fragrant that even from where you stand, you can smell cinnamon, fennel, and something tart like pomegranate syrup. It's warm, sweet, and probably extremely comforting. Not dangerous, not mind-melting. Just the ancient version of seasoned holiday punch. A woman nearby hands a cup to her friend, saying it contains the warmth of 3 provinces. You're hoping she means that poetically and not literally, because importing spices wasn't cheap. They laugh, clink cups, and take a careful sip. Their eyes brighten mostly from the heat, partly from the music, and maybe a little from the thrill of being out at night without their supervisors judging their life choices. A quirky little detail unfolds right next to you. A flute player pauses, digs into a pouch, and sprinkles dried herbs into a steaming jug. The herbs look harmless, likely rosemary and a bit of myrtle. He claims it opens the lungs for longer notes. Whether that's true or just the ancient equivalent of a singer insisting they need precisely 7 cough drops before performing is anyone's guess. You weave deeper into the gathering, noticing that the scents shift as you pass. Different clusters of people. One group prefers warm, honey-thick wine. Another sips something floral, infused with rose petals. A third group holds cups with a strange smoky tang. Someone added resin, probably believing it gave the drink a divine edge. Romans loved to experiment with flavor, even if the results sometimes tasted like someone accidentally dropped a candle into the pot. Over by a statue of Bacchus draped in ivy, a priest is performing a small ritual. He waves a censer of sweet-smelling incense, the smoke rising in rhythmic pulses. He murmurs a prayer for good harvests, safe births, and joyful spirits. The incense includes frankincense, one of Rome's favorites for lifting mood. Again, nothing dramatic, just a scent that makes the air feel warmer, deeper, and more communal. 2 men begin debating the proper way to prepare festival wine. One insists it must be warmed until it clings to the cup. The other says, a cool blend keeps the mind clearer. You suspect both of them have already lost the clarity argument. Their debate feels eternal, like ancient versions of people arguing over cold brew versus hot coffee. You glimpse a group of dancers wearing light wreaths made of ivy. Ivy, the plant associated with Bacchus, was believed to protect festival goers from overindulgence. Did it work? Probably not in any measurable way, but wearing a leafy crown and believing it made you more responsible is very human behavior. It's the same logic behind wearing a hydration reminder bracelet today. A flute trill cuts through the night, and the crowd answers with cheers. The energy rises, but nothing feels chaotic. No darkness, no danger, just warmth, movement, and the unmistakable joy of people who've spent all week grinding grain, hauling water, or filing tax documents for the empire, and are finally letting themselves unwind. Another humorous moment passes by. A man tries to dance while holding 2 cups, realizes he can't, hands one to a stranger, and continues dancing like nothing happened. You quietly hope the stranger didn't backwash. Across the courtyard, you spot a small cluster of more cautious people. They sip light, watered-down wine, preferring conversation to dancing. One mentions a new batch of herbal infusions rumor says can calm the mind without clouding it. His friend rolls her eyes. She's heard the pitch before. Every herb seller thinks they've discovered enlightenment, she says. You silently agree with her. Eventually, the music begins to soften. The dancers slow their steps. The aroma of spiced wine drifts upward, carried by a gentle breeze that tugs at the ivy wreaths. These gatherings weren't about losing control, they were about community, warmth, and stepping out of the rigid routines of Roman daily life. And as the festival fades behind you, the night guides you onward without pause, into the next layer of Rome's intoxicating world. You drift away from the echo of drums and laughter, letting the bachic warmth fade behind you until the streets grow calmer, wider, and cleaner. The lamps here burn brighter. The stone beneath your sandals feels smoother, and the air takes on a new texture, thinner, sweeter, touched by the quiet wealth of Rome's upper classes. You've wandered into the district of elite villas, where the mood-altering experiments weren't rowdy or public. They were subtle, carefully curated, and usually accompanied by someone saying, "Oh, this? It's imported." A servant passes you carrying a bronze censer shaped like a tiny lion. Smoke escapes through carved slits, drifting in elegant spirals. It smells nothing like the tavern fumes you've left behind. This is softer, silkier, almost buttery. You pick up hints of cardamom, myrrh, and a resin so sweet it practically hugs your nostrils. One mainstream fact: wealthy Romans regularly used incense as part of daily life, not just in rituals, but in dining rooms, bedrooms, baths, and private libraries. Scents were considered marks of refinement. They signaled status, mood, and personality, the way someone today might pick out a luxury candle and pretend it doesn't cost more than their groceries. A villa door stands open, and curiosity pulls you inside. The entrance hall glows with warm lamplight, and the air is thick with perfumed smoke. Not the aggressive type. This isn't a fog machine at a concert. It's more like layered ribbons of fragrance drifting around you, coaxing your shoulders to loosen. A slave gently waves a fan over a pottery dish, sending another swirl your way. This blend includes storax resin, something Romans believed softened the mind and elevated the mood. Historians still argue whether storax actually had mild psychoactive effects, or if Romans simply enjoyed any excuse to burn something that smelled expensive. You glance toward the atrium, where a noblewoman oversees the mixing of incense like a conductor managing musicians. She instructs a servant to add a pinch of saffron threads. Yes, the spice worth more than actual gold. The servant sprinkles them into the ash, and a faint honey-like sweetness joins the air. You sense this isn't about intoxication. It's about creating an atmosphere luxurious enough to make daily problems feel distant. That's the real magic. You don't need chemical effects when your living room is actively seducing your nervous system. A quirky detail catches your attention. Hanging near the doorway is a small clay jar, labeled with a crude drawing of a goat. A nearby servant explains it's musk from a certain mountain animal, used sparingly because the scent is potent. And by potent, he means it smells like someone tried to bottle ambition. Romans used animal-based perfumes the way modern hipsters use artisanal hot sauce sparingly, dramatically, and sometimes with questionable results. You walk into the triclinium, the dining room, where low couches circle a long table. The ceiling above is faintly hazy from incense braziers placed at all four corners. Wealthy hosts often arrange scent in layers, something floral drifting low, something earthy rising higher, and something bright floating between. One man lounging on a couch inhales deeply and declares that tonight's mixture awakens the spirit. His friend replies, "It awakens the sinuses," and both burst into sleepy laughter. This is your light joke quota. Even ancient rich people couldn't resist commenting on the room diffuser. A slave enters carrying a tray of perfumed oil. The host dips his fingers into it and rubs a little onto his wrists. The scent lifts a citrusy, herbal brightness that cuts through the heavier incense. Romans believed scented oils could invigorate or calm the mind, depending on the blend. Whether that was aromatherapy or ancient placebo is anyone's guess, but the effect is undeniably soothing. Even you feel it, though you're pretty sure your relaxation is 90% atmosphere and 10% the smug glow of being in a rich person's house. You wander toward the garden courtyard. The open space breathes new scents into the mix: jasmine, cypress, and roses. Wealthy Romans often planted night-blooming flowers, specifically so their fragrance would intensify after sunset. Imagine someone planting an entire garden just to smell good during dinner. It's ambitious, but you respect the commitment. A servant carries a tray of tiny clay cups filled with warm, infused water. Not wine this time, but a light brew of rose, mint, and honey. It's meant to clear the senses. You listen as a young nobleman claims it makes him feel more philosophical. His older brother rolls his eyes and says it makes him feel like he's drinking potpourri. Family dynamics, timeless. You wander deeper into the villa, where a small private library holds yet another perfumed brazier. This one smells sharper, almost medicinal. Laurel leaves crackle on the perfume. Coals. Romans believed laurel stimulated alertness. Poets and scholars burned it during writing sessions. Historians still argue whether this practice genuinely sharpened the mind or simply made poets feel more dramatic. Either way, the scent adds a certain "I'm about to write my masterpiece" energy. A cat strolls across the mosaic floor, tail flicking lazily. It stops near a smoky corner and sits down, as if basking in aromatherapy. You decide the cat is probably the chillest being in the entire empire. A final humorous detail. A servant proudly gestures to a small bronze device shaped like a bird. When he squeezes it, a puff of incense shoots out like an ancient fragrant squirt gun. He demonstrates it twice, clearly hoping you'll be impressed. You pretend to be, it feels right. As you step back into the night, the villa's layered scents cling to you: floral, resinous, herbal, faintly smoky. Not intoxicating, but deeply relaxing, like someone whispered, "Treat yourself" into your ear using a cloud of perfume. The street ahead grows darker again, and Rome guides you onward without pause, into stranger corners and deeper aromas. You leave the soft perfume haze of the villa district behind, stepping back into the cooler night air. Rome is never predictable. You go from incense clouds to ordinary street dust in just a few minutes. But as you walk toward the southern end of the city, the atmosphere changes again. The scents sharpen. There's salt in the breeze, the faint tang of fish. You're nearing the markets that deal in marine goods, fishmongers, apothecaries, and those odd stalls that sell things you really hope are meant for medicine and not dinner. This is where Romans encountered some of their strangest ingredients, substances from the sea that, depending on who you asked, either cured everything or made you think unusual thoughts. And don't worry, we're staying PG-13. No dangerous highs here, just strange beliefs about marine medicines that sometimes blurred into mild mood alterers. A mainstream fact first. Romans believed many sea products had powerful physical effects. Everything from squid ink to crushed shells appeared in medical recipes. Physicians like Galen wrote pages about marine salves and extracts meant to calm nerves, ease pain, or loosen heaviness of the mind. Not exactly intoxicating, but definitely intended to shift your inner weather. You enter a narrow aisle of the fish market, and the smell hits hard. Brine, seaweed, salt, and something musty that's probably drying eel skin. It's not glamorous, but it's authentic. A woman waves a fan over her stall, trying to keep flies off while displaying jars filled with dark liquid. One jar contains cuttlefish ink mixed with vinegar. Good for clarity, she insists to a customer. Whether clarity meant mental focus or simply clearing phlegm is unclear. Historians still argue whether some of these ink mixtures genuinely had psychoactive properties or were just strong enough to make people feel different because they tasted like disappointment. A quirky moment catches your eye. A young apprentice holds up a small dried seahorse and whispers to another boy, "This one helps with courage." The friend nods, like this makes perfect sense. In Roman folk medicine, dried seahorses, starfish, and sometimes even sea sponges were ground into powders for tonics. Did they work? Probably not. But the placebo effect is powerful, especially when a grown-up tells you your crushed seahorse tea will make you bold in front of your crush. You move along and spot a physician's stall, less chaotic, more intentional. Small clay containers sit neatly arranged, each labeled with symbols. The physician lifts one and taps its side. "Sea foam," he announces to a customer, "for calming agitation." You blink. Sea foam? As in foam? Yes, real sea foam scraped from rocks or shoreline. Romans believed it had cooling, soothing qualities. Mixed with wine or honey water, it was said to help quiet the pulse. Whether it genuinely relaxed people or just convinced them they were drinking ocean, energy is unknown. Nearby, another merchant sells sponges soaked in herbal-infused seawater. He claims the mixture opens dreams, especially when placed beside the bed. You notice the mix smells earthy and slightly floral, likely harmless herbs like chamomile mixed with the salty scent of the sea. You imagine Romans sleeping with little sponge dream pillows and feel an unexpected wave of charm. A fishmonger laughs loudly as he guts a fish, tossing the remains into a bucket. He calls across the aisle to brag that he once sold a rare sea creature something like a pufferfish, though the description is vague to a wealthy collector who believed dried puffer scales could enhance memory. Was it true? Doubtful. But you can't deny humans have always tried creative methods to boost brain power. At least this one didn't involve plugging into a questionable memory enhancement device with a suspicious blinking light. You wander toward an apothecary table, where a man demonstrates making a marine salve. He crushes oyster shells into fine powder, mixes them with oil, and adds a drop of something dark seaweed extract. He explains it's for lifting heaviness from the head. Whether that meant clearing migraines or shifting mood is unclear. His customer nods solemnly, convinced. You admire the man's sincerity. Even if his remedies didn't always work, he believed in them wholeheartedly. A small child nearby holds up a jar containing what looks like floating jelly. The vendor says it's seawool, a fibrous material harvested from certain mollusks. Romans sometimes boiled this fluff into broths used in healing rituals. You smell the jar light, salty, slightly sweet, and the vendor tells you some people thought the steam eased anxiety. Historians still argue whether these steams did anything beyond warming the face. But hey, warmth is comforting. Maybe that was enough. One humorous moment passes. A vendor tries to offer you pure sea spirit, basically seawater, in a fancy bottle. He insists one whiff will refresh your soul. You politely decline. He immediately tries selling it to someone else with the confidence of a modern salesperson pushing a miracle detox juice. As you move toward the waterfront, the breeze grows stronger. The waves crash softly, and the smell of the sea overpowers the market's stench. Romans believed the ocean itself had mood-lifting energy that standing near the waves cleansed the mind. You take a slow breath, letting the marine air fill your lungs, and you can't help agreeing. The sound alone feels like a balm. The night presses gently on your back, guiding you onward. You've seen how the sea influenced Roman health, belief, and mood. Now, Rome has more strange substances, waiting plants, powders, and practices that blur the line between comfort, medicine, and mild mood-shifting tradition. And without pausing or announcing anything, the path pulls you deeper into the city's mysteries. You leave the salty breath of the marine markets behind and wander toward a quieter edge of Rome, where the streets narrow again and the lamps burn low, like tired eyes half closing for the night. But the air here carries a different scent, warm, earthy, faintly sweet. You're approaching one of Rome's poppy-growing districts, a place where the boundaries between medicine, rumor, fear, and fascination blur into one long, hazy twilight. Nothing here is meant to scare you. It's just one of those corners of history where everyday plants gained legendary reputations that weren't always deserved. A mainstream fact first. The poppy plant was widely used in Rome, mostly for pain relief, calming nerves, or helping restless people sleep. Doctors, including the famous Galen, wrote about poppy-based remedies in careful tones, stressing moderation and warning about strength. They treated it like any potent herbal tool, useful, not mystical, not dangerous when diluted, and absolutely not something people used recreationally the way modern myths sometimes claim. But rumors? Oh, those traveled faster than pigeons with gossip strapped to their legs. You pass a small stall where an elderly woman sells dried poppy heads, tied neatly in bundles. She crushes one between her fingers, releasing a warm, earthy smell. She tells a customer that boiling the seeds helps soothe crying infants. Another woman nearby nods in agreement, adding that her grandmother swore by the same remedy. Historians still argue whether these diluted mixtures were strong enough to do much besides comfort through warmth and routine, but the belief itself was widespread. You step closer to the stall, and the seller eyes you with the friendly suspicion of someone assessing whether you know anything about herbs, or if you're just here because you followed a nice smell. She explains that poppies were planted in temple gardens as symbols of sleep and peace. Their imagery appears in art, on sarcophagi, even in lullaby metaphors. That dreamy symbolism helped create the modern misconception that Romans spent their evenings drifting into hallucinatory bliss. Spoiler, they did not. They had chores, bills, and in-laws. Even ancient history can't save you from in-laws. A quirky moment interrupts your thoughts. Two teenagers whisper behind a column, holding something wrapped in cloth. They open it just enough for you to see a bright red poppy flower. One boy insists that sniffing the petals makes you dream clearer. The other says his cousin tried it and only sneezed for 10 minutes. They argue for a bit before finally agreeing to stop before a nearby vendor shoos them away. The truth? Poppy petals themselves don't do anything except smell vaguely pleasant and stain your fingers. But teenagers have always believed nature hides secret superpowers. You keep walking and pass a small physician's shop. Inside, a man in a crisp linen tunic measures ingredients with intense precision. He grinds dried poppy material using a mortar and pestle, mixing it with honey and herbs like fennel and coriander. He explains to his apprentice that the mixture must be extremely diluted, just enough to soften pain or soothe coughing. When the apprentice asks whether the remedy causes visions, the physician snorts. Most visions come from lack of sleep or too much imagination, he says. You appreciate his honesty. Just outside the shop, an older man sits on a stool selling carved figurines shaped like poppies. They're meant for household altars, symbols of rest. He proudly claims that dream gods prefer these offerings. Whether that's true is anyone's guess, but the carvings are lovely, glowing in the lamplight like tiny crimson stars. Further ahead, you come across one of the city's small gardens. Tall poppies sway in the night breeze, their round seed pods bobbing like tiny lanterns. A woman tends them with gentle hands, trimming a few stems to take inside. She explains that her family uses the seeds in bread, pastries, and occasionally in warm milk for sleep. You inhale deeply, the air smells earthy, lightly floral, and comforting. A humorous moment arrives when a man walking past mutters, "Careful with those plants, they'll make you float off the roof." The gardener immediately glares at him and fires back. That was once, and only because he skipped dinner. They both laugh, proving that even ancient rumors had comedic origin stories. You wander down a side street where rumors linger like fog. Someone tells you that certain soldiers used poppy mixtures before battle to calm shaking hands. Someone else insists that gladiators used it to numb small wounds so they could keep performing. The truth? Scholars debate these stories. Historians still argue whether such uses were common practice, rare exceptions, or exaggerated tales meant to make warriors seem more dramatic. Romans loved drama as much as they'd times. Loved marble. You pass another home where a woman crushes seeds with a small rolling pin. She tells her neighbor the mixture helps her husband sleep after long days at the docks. The neighbor replies that she prefers chamomile poppies, make her head too heavy. Both solutions sound harmless and familiar. You realize you're basically walking through the ancient Roman version of a modern online forum where people swap bedtime tea recipes. A gentle breeze blows through the alley, rustling the leaves of nearby poppy plants. They glow softly under the lamplight, peaceful rather than mysterious. For all the myths attached to them, Romans primarily viewed poppies as medicine, food, and symbols. They respected their strength, diluted them heavily, and used them thoughtfully. No wild trips, no dramatic highs, just quiet comfort. As you move toward the edge of the district, you notice how calm the air feels, how soft the scents are. The night seems to exhale around you, and without any fanfare, without any heading change or reset, Rome nudges you onward again, guiding you deeper into its tapestry of everyday substances, curious beliefs, and subtle mood-shifting traditions. You drift away from the moonlit poppy gardens and slip back toward the busier veins of the city, where the streets buzz long after sunset. Rome never truly sleeps, it just shifts tempo. And now, as you follow the glow of torches toward a crowded intersection, you enter a space that sits somewhere between a market, a carnival, and a very early prototype of a modern wellness fair. This is where curiosity sellers gather vendors who deal in powders, balms, roots, and mixtures that promise to soothe, energize, clarify, or occasionally unlock hidden senses, depending on how dramatic the seller feels today. The smell hits first. A blend of sweet oil, earthy dust, burned herbs, and something minty that might be medicinal or might be someone overboiling soup 2 stalls away. The sounds follow. Next, clinking jars, excited sales pitches, the occasional skeptical grunt from a customer who's already been burned once by a miracle powder. One mainstream fact: the Roman marketplace wasn't just for food and tools. It was also a hub for medical, cosmetic, and herbal goods. Everyday Romans bought balms for sore muscles, powders for headaches, and salves for scraped knees. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, just the ancient equivalent of shopping for teas and ointments at a modern pharmacy, except with more shouting and fewer health disclaimers. You step up to a stall draped in colourful cloth, where a vendor with a dramatic moustache waves a sachet of crushed herbs under a customer's nose. The scent drifts toward you, warm, spicy, maybe a hint of anise. He claims the mixture brightens the mind. You lean closer, and he quickly pivots, trying to sell it to you instead. You look like someone who thinks deeply. This will make you think smoothly. You politely decline. He moves on without missing a beat. His energy could probably power an entire bathhouse. The quirky moment arrives fast. A boy with big eyes and messy hair proudly holds up a jar of bright yellow powder. The label, if you can call the scratched symbol a label, suggests it's safflower. He whispers to a friend that it helps you dream in color. The friend nods with a seriousness normally reserved for military briefings. Spoiler: safflower is mostly used for dye. If it made dreams more colorful, every Roman pillow would have been a museum exhibit. You continue walking as the vendors grow stranger. One offers a balm made of rose oil and crushed almonds. He promises it lifts heaviness from the spirit, though his vague hand gestures make it unclear whether he's describing sadness, fatigue, or indigestion. Another stall advertises a clay pot filled with something thick and green. The seller whispers dramatically that it's a forest night paste, which sounds poetic but suspicious. A quick sniff tells you it's just mashed mint and bay leaves, basically ancient cold rub. At the next stall, a healer with long, silver-streaked hair carefully measures out a powder into small parchment wraps. She uses a bronze spoon the size of your thumb. Her movements are slow and deliberate. A customer asks whether the powder causes visions. The healer shakes her head. "It causes rest," she says. Which is better? You admire her for being the lone voice of calm in a neighborhood where everyone else is trying to sound like a magician. Historians still argue whether some of these powders included ingredients with genuine mild effects, or whether sellers exaggerated their benefits to draw attention. The surviving texts contradict each other, and some ancient descriptions read like a mix of practical advice and very aggressive marketing. You pause at a stall selling tiny clay vials filled with colored oils. The vendor invites you to smell each one. One vial smells sweet and floral lavender and honey. Another sharp and herbal rosemary and pine. The third, well, you're not sure. He claims it opens the lungs, and you suspect it's just very strong mustard. Still, the scents swirl pleasantly in the air. A humorous moment pops up when a merchant hands a cup of warm herbal water to a man who looks exhausted. The man takes one sip, pauses, and says, "It tastes like my sandals smell." The merchant beams proudly. That means it's working. The man's face suggests he disagrees, but he drinks it anyway because pride is a powerful force. A woman at a nearby table sells powdered roots imported from the provinces. She explains that one root helps with headaches, another with nerves, and another with mind fog. Romans were big believers in treating ailments with combinations of herbs and roots, and many of these mixtures genuinely did help, though mostly in gentle, natural ways. You sift through a bowl of dried leaves and notice the scent is comforting, earthy, and slightly peppery. In the back corner of the market, an older vendor displays a tray of tiny bronze amulets filled with scented resin. You open one and catch a whiff of something warm, woody, and faintly sweet. He explains these were worn around the neck to strengthen courage or calm shaking hands. Some soldiers supposedly carried them as talismans. Again, scholars debate whether the effect came from the scent or the symbol, but the idea is charming either way. You walk past a final stall where a pair of traveling peddlers boast about a powder that helps clear the mind of ghosts. You decide this is not the moment to investigate ancient mental health metaphors in a marketplace that also sells questionable lotions. You keep walking. The night air shifts again as you step beyond the cluster of vendors. The scents fade behind you, minty, earthy, spicy, floral, leaving only a faint, lingering sweetness on your clothes. The marketplace didn't offer highs. It offered comfort, ritual, placebo, and the simple human joy of believing that a small pouch of leaves could make a bad day better. And without any pause or formal transition, Rome guides you deeper into another corner, where scents and sensations blur into something stranger still. You leave the curiosity sellers behind, stepping back into the wider arteries of the city, where the crowds thin just enough for the night breeze to stir your clothes. The torches flicker overhead, casting long shadows that stretch across the cobblestones. Ahead, you notice a building humming with anticipation. People stream in wearing light cloaks, chatting softly, some laughing, some already humming a tune. You follow them, drawn by something in the air, something warm, sweet, and unmistakably theatrical. You're approaching a Roman theatre, not the grand amphitheatres built for gladiators and roaring crowds. This is a smaller, more intimate performance hall, half temple, half stage, half perfume shop. Yes, that's 3 halves. Rome didn't believe in math when creating vibes. A mainstream fact, Roman theatres often used scent during performances. Burning incense, perfumed oils, and aromatic smokes weren't just decorative, they were part of the stagecraft. Sense conveyed. Mood the way music scores do today. A scene in a forest? Burn pine resin. A romantic moment? Release myrrh or rose oil. A comedic bit? Toss a handful of sage or bay leaves on the coals for a crisp, bright aroma. The audience didn't just watch a play, they smelled it. You step inside and find a seat among the gently murmuring crowd. The air is warm, thickened by the swirl of incense rising from small braziers placed strategically near the stage. You inhale, and the scent feels layered, something woody at the base, something floral in the middle, and something spicy drifting on top like a theatrical garnish. A performer in a bright mask steps out, raises their hand, and suddenly a stagehand tosses resin onto a glowing coal pan. A sweet plume of smoke leaps upward, drifting across the front rows like a soft fog machine. The crowd sighs, literally sighs with pleasure. This is the Roman version of immersive theatre. You catch a quirky detail almost immediately. On the side of the stage, two young assistants operate what can only be described as ancient scent cannons. Long tubes filled with aromatic powders, they blow toward the audience through small openings. One boy whispers, "Forest scene next?" The other nods and prepares a handful of crushed pine needles mixed with a pinch of powdered myrtle. When the moment comes, he blows, and a gust of woodland air drifts over your face. You can't help but grin. You didn't expect Roman air fresheners to have this level of enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether these theatrical scents had psychological effects strong enough to alter mood, or whether they were simply delightful enhancements. Some accounts describe audiences becoming dreamy or energized when certain scents were used. But ancient writers loved exaggeration almost as much as playwrights loved improbable plot twists. The play begins, and as the actors move, the scents shift like chapters. A comedic exchange brings a burst of bright, lemony fragrance, likely citron peel burned with oil. A solemn monologue brings warm myrrh that settles heavy in your chest. A dramatic revelation arrives with a sharp hint of frankincense. The timing is impeccable. You realize the scent team backstage deserves as much applause as the actors. You glance around and see the audience reacting not to the scents alone, but to the combination of scent, sound, and movement. A woman beside you smiles faintly as the floral cloud drifts over her. A man behind you murmurs that tonight's resin is higher quality than usual. You suspect he's saying that to impress his date. A humorous moment breaks the atmosphere when one of the scent boys sneezes mid-blow, accidentally launching a puff of powdered rosemary into the air in the wrong direction. It showers a group of performers, who freeze as if part of the choreography. The audience bursts into laughter. One actor uses the moment to ad-lib, sniffing dramatically and declaring, "Ah, the forest spirits bless us." The crowd loses it. Theatre magic? 1. Stagehand allergies? 0. As the performance deepens, you notice the air becoming honey-thick. The scents have been smouldering for hours, mixing together in ways the playwright probably didn't anticipate. But strangely, the layered smoke doesn't overwhelm you. It wraps around your senses in warm waves, making the room feel softer, rounder, like the edges have melted. A man in the front row leans to his wife and whispers that the scent is making him float. You're fairly certain he means emotionally, because the incense is mild and safe. But Rome being Rome, people loved dramatic language. Everything was divine or uplifting or transformative. If someone smelled strong cinnamon, they'd claim enlightenment. In one corner, a small bowl of perfumed oil warms over a tiny flame. The scent rises slowly, thick and sweet. The actors step near it during a dream sequence, letting the aroma signal a shift in mood. Romans didn't have lighting effects like modern theatres, so scent was their version of special effects. And honestly, it works. Historians still argue whether certain heavily resin-based mixtures created drowsiness in enclosed theatres, or whether the warmth and darkness simply lulled tired audiences into a gentle stupor. You can feel the lull yourself, not because anything dangerous is happening, but because you've been walking all night, breathing in every scent Rome has to offer. Your mind is softening into the rhythm of the play, the glow of torches, the flow of dialogue. By the time the performance ends, the air has turned velvety. The crowd stands, stretching sleepily, murmuring about the show. As you exit the theatre, a final wave of warm air sweeps past you, scented faintly with burnt rosemary and pine. It clings to your clothes, leaving you with a soft reminder of Rome's most immersive art. And without pausing or announcing any transition, you drift back into the night, Rome ready to reveal yet another corner where scent, ritual, and mood intertwine. You step out of the warm, fragrant glow of the theatre and into a quieter side street, where the night feels thinner again, cooler, almost crisp. The lamps burn low here, and the crowd thins into scattered footsteps. But Rome never truly empties. Someone is always selling something, whispering something, performing something. And as you wander forward, you begin to notice figures lingering along the edges of the street. Hooded silhouettes, soft-spoken voices, little tables set up beneath awnings. Welcome to the world of Rome's magicians, charm dealers, wandering healers, and those grey area practitioners who lived somewhere between doctor, herbalist, performer, and mildly eccentric neighbour. None of them are dangerous. Most aren't even unusual by ancient standards. But each of them specializes in something Romans found irresistible. Subtle experiences, gentle trances, calming, rituals, and the kind of whispered promises that hint at something slightly beyond the ordinary. A mainstream fact: Rome had countless healers who weren't officially doctors, root specialists, charm sellers, amulet makers, wise women, and wandering herbalists. Some offered medical help, others offered emotional comfort. A few blended the two into elaborate rituals involving herbs, chanting, or symbolic gestures. And while they weren't offering altered states in any modern sense, some rituals were relaxing enough to make people feel lighter. You approach the first stall, where an older woman sits cross-legged behind a collection of tiny clay bowls filled with coloured powders. She hums softly, a repetitive, hypnotic melody. A young man kneels in front of her as she wafts a small bundle of burning herbs around his head. The smoke is thin and gentle, smelling faintly of sage and fennel. She claims it clears shadows from the mind. Whether shadows meant stress or melancholy is unclear. Historians still argue whether these cleansing rituals had psychological effects or were simply comforting performances that helped people feel grounded. A quirky sight catches your eye at the next stall. A man juggling 3 small pouches while muttering an incantation that sounds suspiciously like a grocery list. He offers each pouch to customers with dramatic flair. One contains crushed rose petals, another ground bay leaves, and the third, something that looks like glitter but is probably just powdered resin. He claims each blend can guide dreams toward clarity. His sales pitch is so theatrical that you almost believe him. Almost. You continue onward to a tall, wiry man wearing a patchwork tunic. He holds a small bronze cup filled with warm liquid. He invites a passerby to smell it. The steam smells woody and slightly bitter. He explains that he mixes chamomile with a hint of wild lettuce, nothing harmful, meant to help the drinker relax before sleep. The passerby nods, clearly relieved to find a healer who's more practical than mystical. The man assures him, "This won't make you see spirits. It will make you not care about them for a while." That earns a laugh from both of you. A small cluster of people gathers around a woman who claims she can induce soft focus of the mind using rhythmic tapping. She taps a set of small stones against a wooden box in a pattern, slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. It's soothing, hypnotic. One customer closes his eyes. She dabs a hint of scented oil under his nose, rosemary and mint, and continues tapping until his shoulders drop. He opens his eyes and says he feels calmer. The woman beams. "Your spirit was tangled," she says. "Now it's combed." The metaphor is delightful, if slightly odd. Just past her, you spot a travelling healer arranging small charms on a rug. Each charm contains a slip of cloth soaked in herbal oil. He offers them as pocket calmers. You pick one up. It smells like lavender mixed with citrus. Gentle, pleasant, nothing mystical. He tells you soldiers sometimes carried similar charms to steady their nerves. Whether he's exaggerating or repeating a half-true rumor is hard to tell. Ancient marketing didn't come with fine print. A humorous moment unfolds when a young boy runs up to a magician claiming he has trouble sleeping. The magician hands him a small wooden disc, whispering that it wards off bad dreams. The boy squints and asks, "Does it make dreams better too?" The magician pauses, considers, and finally admits, "If you believe hard enough." The boy nods solemnly, as though he's been given a sacred personal mission. You wander deeper and find a healer grinding herbs with a stone pestle. The smell rising from the bowl is earthy and comforting. She mixes basil, mint, and something musky that might be crushed cypress. She spreads the paste on a strip of linen and hands it to a woman who seems tense. "Tie this near your bed," she says softly. "It will quiet the spinning of thoughts." Historians still argue whether these nighttime herbs had noticeable calming effects beyond aroma, but their use was widespread, suggesting people trusted them deeply. You notice another healer who specializes in chants. He kneels before a customer, places a tiny ceramic dish of warm oil between them, and begins a low, steady hum. The sound vibrates in your chest as you watch. He adds a single drop of cedar oil to the dish, and the scent mixes with the hum in a way that feels ancient, ritualistic, soothing. The customer visibly relaxes, shoulders sinking. The healer finishes by whispering, "Your heart is lighter now." Whether or not the heart was literally lighter, the customer certainly looks like he believes it. Finally, you approach a magician wearing a robe decorated with stars. He offers powdered resin he calls moon dust, which he claims enhances intuition. You smell it. It's just myrrh and a little cinnamon. He gives you a conspiratorial wink as if to say, "The magic is in the branding." You appreciate the honesty. By the time you leave this street, your senses are layered with scents: mint, cedar, sage, lavender, resin, and a little theatrical nonsense. But mostly what lingers is the feeling. These wandering healers didn't try to intoxicate people. They soothed them, distracted them, relaxed them, and gave them rituals to hold on to when life felt heavy. And without pausing for a breath or signaling a new chapter, the night leads you deeper into Rome's scented, strange, and sometimes surprisingly gentle world. You drift away from the alley of charm sellers and soft-spoken healers, stepping back into Rome's wider night. The lamps here glow steadier, taller, as if this part of the city has something to prove. And it does, because you're headed toward Rome's Spice District, where merchants deal in some of the most expensive, mysterious, downright rumor-stirring imports in the empire. The air thickens before you even reach the first stall. Warm, sharp, sweet, smoky scents overlap like colors on a painter's palette. You're entering a world where spices weren't just for cooking. They were believed to warm the body, clear the mind, lift the spirit, and occasionally heat the imagination, depending on which merchant needed to make rent that week. A mainstream fact: Roman trade routes stretched from Britain to India, from Africa to the Near East. With them came spices: cinnamon, pepper, saffron, cardamom, turmeric, myrrh, frankincense, cassia, ginger, and countless blends whose exact recipes have been lost to time. Many were used for medical purposes as much as for flavor. And some Romans genuinely believed certain spices could affect mood or energy. You stop at a stall draped in crimson cloth, where a merchant is grinding something bright orange with a stone mortar. The scent rises warm, earthy, slightly bitter. Turmeric. He mixes it with honey water, claiming it calms storms of the belly and storms of the head. This seems like a generous promise, but the woman buying it nods confidently. Romans trusted spices the way modern wellness folks trust kombucha, with hope, conviction, and a tiny dash of denial. At the next stall, jars of cinnamon sticks tower like a forest. The merchant breaks one and waves it under your nose. The warm sweetness makes your stomach flutter. He insists that certain cinnamon blends encourage joy. Historians still argue whether cinnamon had any real mood-altering effects or whether people simply felt fancier when consuming something rare and expensive. Realistically, it was probably the ancient equivalent of enjoying a deluxe latte, comforting, indulgent, and absolutely uplifting if you were stressed. A quirky moment catches your attention a few stalls down. Two teenagers hover near a table of peppercorns. One whispers that Eastern pepper makes your thoughts race like chariot wheels. The other snorts and pops a single peppercorn into his mouth. His eyes widen instantly, face flushing. He coughs and wheezes while his friend pats his back dramatically. No racing thoughts, just the universal human experience of underestimating Pepper's commitment to chaos. You wander toward a well-decorated stall manned by an elegantly dressed merchant. He opens a small ivory box, revealing threads of saffron glowing like embers. The scent is subtle, floral, honey-like, with a faint hay softness. He tells a well-dressed couple that saffron brightens the heart. And here's your historical fact with a wink. Some Roman texts do indeed claim saffron could lift mood. Was that chemical or pure psychological luxury? Hard to say. But saffron is still considered precious today, and expensive things often get magical reputations whether they deserve them or not. A woman at another table displays a tray of small resin pellets, myrrh, frankincense, balm of Gilead. She burns a sliver of frankincense over a hot coal, releasing a cloud that smells sharp, sweet, and clean. She explains it opens inner doors. Whether those doors led to insight or just a calmer breathing rate is unclear, but you can't deny the scent feels like stepping into a warm, clear morning. Nearby, a spice blender hunches over a table mixing a powdered blend meant for wine. Cinnamon, pepper, myrtle, a little dried citrus peel. He claims that when added to warm wine, it inspires courage. His assistant nods reverently. You suspect it inspires heartburn more than courage, but who are you to ruin someone's marketing strategy? A humorous moment unfolds when a man tries to sniff a jar of cardamom too enthusiastically and accidentally inhales a tiny seed. He sputters, sneezes explosively, and insists he's having a spiritual revelation. His friends laugh so loudly that even the saffron merchant cracks a smile. Further down, a doctor sits, at a small table flipping through a wax tablet filled with medical notes. He purchases a small bag of ginger from a passing merchant. He explains to his apprentice, who is desperately trying to look like he understands everything, that ginger warms the blood. He also mutters that too much of it excites the mind, though he immediately clarifies that he means to it metaphorically, not in any mystical or dangerous way. His apprentice nods solemnly, probably understanding none of it. You pass a tiny incense shop with shelves lined in curved clay jars. The owner lets you smell a blend of cinnamon, cassia, and benzoin resin. The fragrance is sweet, smoky, and strangely uplifting. He calls it sunrise dust, and claims aristocrats burn it in their studies for inspiration. Historians still argue whether these imported resins genuinely sharpened focus, or whether the exotic aroma simply helped people feel more awake and important. One stall surprises you with something simpler: dried ginger root dipped in honey. A child buys a piece, pops it into his mouth, and immediately begins bouncing on his toes like he's been plugged into a socket. His mother chuckles and tells you ginger warms the belly and the spirit. You suspect she means it literally. Ginger is a stimulant, but not a strong one. It's more like the ancient version of drinking sweet, spicy tea, energizing, comforting, and safe. At the far end of the market, you spot an older merchant who blends spices according to zodiac signs. He insists that certain combinations balance humors and calm storms of the mind. Whether you believe him or not, the little pouches smell genuinely pleasant: clove, citrus peel, and something floral you can't identify. As you leave the spice district, the scents cling to your clothes: cinnamon warmth, resin sweetness, ginger sharpness. None of these imports were drugs. They were comforts, luxuries, mood shifters in the gentlest sense, part ritual, part indulgence, part aromatherapy, hundreds of years before anyone coined the word. And without stopping, the night carries you into the next Roman space, where warmth, steam, and subtle sensations shape the story. You drift away from the spice district with its warm, swirling clouds of cinnamon and ginger, and soon the air cools into something lighter: fresh stone, trickling water, the faint mineral tang of steam escaping from vents in the street. You know this scent already. Rome loved its baths the way modern people love their phones: daily, obsessively, and with absolutely no concern for how crowded things might get. And tonight, the pull of warm water guides you toward one of the city's great social hubs, the bathhouse. From the outside, it looks calm. Lamps glow softly along the arches, and a few late-night bathers shuffle inside, towels over their shoulders. But as soon as you push through the doorway, the entire character of the night changes. Warmth hits you first, a soft wave hugging your face, and then the scent: steam infused with herbs, oils, and mineral-rich water. Not intoxicating, not overwhelming, just quietly soothing, like someone wrapped your brain in a heated blanket. One mainstream fact: Romans often infused bathhouse steam with herbs. Mint, rosemary, bay leaf, chamomile, even rose petals at the fancier establishments. Not for highs, not for visions, just for relaxation, cleansing, and the pleasant illusion that you weren't soaking in the same pool as 60 other people. You follow the flow of bathers into the appetiterium, the dressing room. Slaves rub scented oil on their patrons' arms and backs, preparing them for the heat ahead. The oil smells lightly of saffron and olive, warm, comforting. A man beside you inhales deeply and sighs, saying the scent loosens the chest. His friend replies, "It loosens my standards." They laugh. That's one joke down. You step into the tepidarium, the warm room where heat radiates from the floor and walls. The air carries a soft floral scent, likely rose or chamomile. Steam rises in slow curls, drifting around bodies stretched on marble benches. Historians still argue whether certain infused steams had any mild sedative effects, or whether the punch of warm humidity alone made people feel dreamy. Steam does that. It slows your thoughts, softens your muscles, and melts your edges until you're basically a warm noodle with sandals. A quirky detail appears in the corner. A bathhouse attendant tosses fresh bundles of mint into a small steam vent. For a moment, the room smells like a giant herbal teacup. Mint steam was believed to clear the head, which is ancient code for wake you up before you accidentally fall asleep in public. A young man inhales dramatically, shudders, and says he feels as sharp as a senator. The attendant bursts into laughter. Hopefully not as honest, he mutters. You move deeper into the caldarium, the hot room. This is where things get interesting. The heat wraps around you in thick waves, and the air smells faintly sweet from infused oils poured over the heated bronze grates. Basil oil is popular tonight, mixed with a little thyme. The herbal scent melts into the steam until you can't tell where the air ends and the fragrance begins. You can almost feel it settle on your skin like a warm glow. An older man sits on a bench, gently massaging his temples. He explains to a friend that the basil steam lifts his spirit and keeps dark moods away. His friend nods, though he seems more interested in the biscuits someone smuggled in from the frigidarium snack vendor. A bathhouse worker walks by with a jug of scented oil and pours a drizzle onto the hot stones. Instantly, a cloud rises woodsy, slightly spicy, like laurel and myrtle mixed together. Historians still argue whether oils burned over heat actually released compounds strong enough to influence mood, or whether the sensory richness of the room simply lulled the mind. But the result is unmistakable. The entire room shifts from hot to heavenly. You step into the steam pool for a moment, watching the vapors swirl up in silver ribbons. Reflections on the water shimmer like soft lanterns. It's calming, hypnotic, a bit like being slowly cooked, but in a pleasant, spa-like way. Two men near you discuss the merits of different infused steams. One claims mint gives him clarity. The other insists basil helps dreams afterward. They debate gently, the way people today debate which herbal tea is best for sleep. A humorous note drifts your way when a man slips slightly on the wet marble and blames the spirits rising from the steam. His friend helpfully tells him the spirits also loosened his ankles. Even in ancient history, friends roasted each other. After enough warmth to melt your eyebrows, you slip out toward the frigidarium, the cold pool. The air chills instantly, crisp and clean, washing away the herbal fog clinging to your skin. The water is cold enough to make you gasp, but as you sink to your shoulders, a surprising scent reaches you, faint citrus from oils released earlier. Some bathhouses mixed scented oils into the cold pools for contrast. The effect feels like inhaling fresh air after a warm bakery. You step out of the pool, dripping, and a worker hands you a cloth sprinkled with powdered bay leaves. He instructs you to rub your arms lightly. Romans believed bay refreshed the senses. It smells warm and sharp, waking you gently without the kind of jolt coffee gives modern people. As you re-enter the evening air outside, the layered bathhouse scents cling to you. Mint, basil, rose, bay softly woven into your skin. None of it intoxicating, none of it strange. Just warmth, earthiness, and the kind of relaxation that makes the world feel dimmer and kinder. And without any formal break or new heading, Rome nudges you back into its night, guiding you toward another space where comfort, ritual, and mild mood shifts blend together. You step out of the bathhouse warm and perfumed, the night air brushing your skin with a coolness that makes everything feel newly sharpened. The streets here grow quieter, flatter, and wider, and the scent of steam fades behind you. Ahead lies something different, rougher voices, heavier footsteps, the clink of metal, the unmistakable tone of people who have seen too much sun, too many long marches, and definitely too many commanders yelling about discipline. You've wandered into the orbit of Rome's soldiers, not the grand legions on parade day, just the everyday mixture of guards, veterans, and off-duty fighters lingering around barracks entrances, food stalls, and small fire pits. This is the world of military field fixes, the subtle, practical things soldiers use to stay calm, brave, steady, or at least less miserable during long campaigns. Nothing dangerous, nothing dramatic, just human beings trying to get through their routines with limited ingredients and even more limited sleep. A mainstream fact. Roman soldiers relied heavily on simple herbs, wines, and salves for stress, pain, and fatigue. Most remedies were mild mint for headaches, bay for nerves, vinegar water for alertness, and warm spiced wine for relaxation. They weren't looking for highs. They were looking for survival. You pass a small campfire where two young soldiers sit on low wooden stools, stirring a pot of something steamy. It smells sharp vinegar mixed with herbs. One soldier lifts a cup and offers it to his friend. Posca, he explains, a mix of water, vinegar, and sometimes herbs. Soldiers drank it constantly. Not glamorous, but effective. Cooling, hydrating, cleansing, keeps the mind awake, he adds. His friend nods, though he makes a face like he'd rather be drinking anything else. You taste the air and suspect they're not exaggerating. Posca smells like ambition mixed with salad dressing. A quirky moment unfolds at the next fire. A veteran with a beard like a broom holds a small bundle of bay leaves. He crushes one between his fingers, inhaling deeply. "Warriors calm," he says. Another soldier snorts. "That's kitchen seasoning." The veteran insists bay helps him focus before a long march, and actually, some ancient texts mention bay as a clarifying herb. Whether it worked, or whether the veteran simply needed a ritual is unclear, but he looks calmer after smelling it. So maybe that's enough. Nearby, a medicus, the military healer, kneels beside a crate filled with herbs and tools. He grinds something earthy with a stone pestle. "Comfrey and mint paste," he tells a soldier with sore shoulders, "for tightening the spirit and cooling the heat." The soldier nods like this is a perfectly normal phrase, and not something that sounds like a wellness slogan. The medicus spreads the paste onto cloth strips, which soon give off a soft mint aroma. Historians still argue whether these mixtures had mild mood effects, or whether the soothing smell simply paired well with a much-needed shoulder massage. You walk farther and notice a pair of archers sitting beneath a torch, rubbing small amounts of oil into their hands. The oil smells spicy, ginger or pepper, perhaps. One claims it keeps his fingers warm and steady before shooting. The other says it wakes the blood. Both sound like ancient ways of saying, "This helps me not mess up." Soldiers weren't chasing euphoria, they wanted reliability. A soldier passes you carrying a small clay cup filled with warm wine. But this isn't ordinary wine, it smells heavily spiced, with hints of fennel and myrtle. He tells his friend it settles the nerves after patrol. His friend nods, though he warns, "Don't drink too much, or you'll start seeing double officers." They both laugh. Light joke quota achieved. You overhear a group discussing dream vision salves used during long campaigns. One soldier insists his unit rubbed lavender oil on their wrists before sleep so they could rest quicker between marches. Another scoffs, saying lavender is for babies but admits he slept. Like a stone, the one time he tried it. You suspect peer pressure has been around since the dawn of humanity. A humorous moment pops up when a soldier tries a new shoulder rub made of crushed rosemary and olive oil. He smells it, blinks, and says loudly, "It makes me feel wise." His companions burst into laughter. "You? Wise?" one shouts. The soldier grins and replies, "Let me have this." Rosemary was genuinely believed to help memory, so technically he's on brand. You head toward a quieter corner, where a veteran sits alone on a bench, watching the fire. He holds a small sachet cloth tied with string. Inside are dried herbs, chamomile, mint, maybe a little thyme. He explains softly that he keeps the sachet near his armor to soften the shaking before battle. Was it magical? No. But the scent was familiar, grounding, and in the chaotic world of marching and fighting, familiarity was priceless. Historians still argue whether Roman soldiers actually used certain calming herbs systematically, or whether accounts are exaggerations based on isolated anecdotes. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Soldiers used whatever comfort they could, find herbs, scents, routines, rituals, and these small things became anchors. You linger near a group of soldiers preparing for early patrol. One pours a mixture of warm water and crushed mint into a small bowl. He dips a cloth in and presses it to his forehead. "Keeps the fog away," he says. His friend splashes his face with cold water instead, claiming it works better. They argue briefly, the way tired co-workers do at 4 a.m., each convinced their method is superior. A medicus walks by carrying a jar of salve made with honey and infused herbs. He explains to a younger recruit that the salve helps with cuts, scrapes, and tightness of the mind. Tightness of the mind. You file that away as the perfect ancient phrase for modern stress. As you move away from the firelit barracks, the scents fade: vinegar, mint, bay, rosemary. Nothing strong, nothing strange, just the quiet, practical tools of people who needed courage and calm in equal measure. And without a break or heading shift, the night gently steers you toward Rome's next mixture of medicine, ritual, and gentle mind-easing traditions. You leave the soldiers behind, following a quieter road that slopes gently toward a part of Rome where the lamps glow a little steadier and the chatter softens into thoughtful murmurs. This is doctor territory, not the wandering healers or the charm sellers, but the trained physicians who read Greek texts, studied anatomy, and experimented with remedies that sometimes worked brilliantly, and sometimes worked mostly because people believed very, very hard. Tonight, you're stepping into the world of Roman doctors and their experimental tonics mixtures meant to soothe pain, settle nerves, or steady emotions. None of them were designed to intoxicate, but some blends were strong enough, fragrant enough, or unusual enough that people walked away feeling different. Not high, just shifted. A mainstream fact. Roman medicine drew heavily from Greek knowledge. Doctors like Galen and Dioscorides described hundreds of herbal remedies: mint for digestion, fennel for clarity, chamomile for calm, willow bark for pain, and dozens more. These mixtures were mild, medicinal, and focused on healing, not escapism. You step into a small domus, converted into a clinic. The front room glows with lamplight, shelves lined with clay jars labeled in Greek letters. A physician in a neat white tunic stands behind a low table, grinding herbs in a mortar. The smell rises earthy, woody, rich with something sharp like fennel seed. He looks up long enough to nod at you before handing a small cup of warm liquid to a patient sitting on a bench. The patient sips, exhales, and relaxes visibly. For the nerves, the physician explains, mint, chamomile, fennel, helps the mind settle. The patient nods gratefully. Historians still argue whether these diluted herbal brews had noticeable calming effects or whether warmth and ritual made the difference. But as you watch the man relax, you think both factors probably helped. A quirky moment unfolds at a side table where a young apprentice is carefully heating a pot of infused oil. He dips a finger in after blowing on it dramatically, sniffing with intense concentration. "It smells thoughtful," he announces. The physician sighs quietly but deeply. The apprentice proudly explains that the oil contains rosemary, which some Romans believed sharpens memory. Whether it did or not, rosemary has always had a reputation for clarity. You move to another part of the room where a second physician mixes a tonic based on honey water and crushed herbs. The scent is sweet, nutty, a little spicy. He stirs slowly, explaining to a patient that the mixture helps with heavy dreams, which probably meant nightmares or restless sleep. He reassures the patient with a calm smile. "This will not cloud the mind," he says. "It will ease it." A woman enters, clutching her stomach. The physician hands her a cup filled with a warm, bitter-smelling liquid. "Willow bark," he tells her. "For pain." You catch the scent as she sips woodsy, slightly sweet. This remedy is the ancestor of modern pain relievers, though weaker and slower. Still, her shoulders ease, and her expression softens. At the back of the clinic sits a table of dried herbs hanging from cords. Lavender, sage, laurel, myrtle. Each bundle emits its own subtle fragrance. The apprentice waves a hand through the lavender, letting the scent drift toward a tense-looking patient. "For tired minds," he explains. The patient inhales and nods, breathing slower. A humorous moment drifts by when another apprentice drops a jar of powdered chamomile, creating a fragrant explosion across the room. Everyone freezes. Then, the physician pinches the bridge of his nose and mutters, "At least it's a relaxing mess." A valid point. Next to him, a doctor mixes a bitter tonic containing tiny amounts of valerian root. He warns the patient that the flavor is strong, but the result is gentle. "It helps the mind loosen its grip," he says. The patient winces before even tasting it. Valerian has always been polarizing effective for some, unpleasant for many, but very mild in ancient doses. On a shelf nearby, small clay cups hold oils infused with herbs like myrtle and bay leaf. The physician explains to a curious merchant that rubbing these oils on temples or wrists before sleep invites calm dreams. The merchant buys 2 cups, one for himself, one for his wife, who he says worries more than she breathes. An older physician sits near the doorway, gently heating a pot of milk infused with a hint of honey and crushed poppy seeds so diluted it's essentially warm milk with a floral note. He gives it to an elderly woman who says she hasn't slept well in 3 nights. "This is not for dreams," he tells her, "just for softening the edges." She thanks him quietly. Historians still argue whether Roman doctors were truly experimenting with psychoactive effects or simply working with the most reliable calming agents available. The texts don't describe getting high. They describe easing tension, cooling fevers, settling minds, and helping people sleep. As you step back outside, the scents linger on your clothes. Lavender sweetness, fennel sharpness, the earthy warmth of crushed herbs. Rome's doctors didn't chase exotic formulas. They chased balance, relief, and peace. The night feels lighter as you leave the clinic. And without a pause or a new heading, the city guides you into another corner, one far from noble homes and medical shops, where rural traditions whisper their own gentle secrets. You move away from the physician's quarter and follow a road that thins into a quieter edge of the city, where the stone buildings shrink, the air cools, and the lamps scatter out like distant fireflies. Beyond this point, Rome softens. The city dissolves into fields, sheds, orchards, and small clusters of rural homes, places where people rely less on physicians and more on inherited tradition, grandmother knowledge, and the comforting belief that nature offers gentle tools for every mood, ache, and worry. This is the world of rural folk practices, not the dramatic magic of legends, not the frightening superstition of rumors, just the everyday ways country people used plants to soothe themselves and each other. Simple remedies, calming routines, nothing dangerous or intoxicating, just the ancient equivalent of herbal tea, warm soup, and my grandmother swears this works. A mainstream fact. Rural Romans used a wide range of local herbs for relaxation, headaches, stomach aches, and sleep. They relied on sage, mint, fennel, chamomile, lavender, and even barley water. These mixtures weren't meant to alter consciousness, only to bring small comforts in long, tiring days. As you follow a dirt path, the night fills with new scents: crushed grass, moist earth, the faint sweetness of ripening fruit. A woman crouches beside her small garden, trimming sage leaves under lamplight. She explains to a neighbor that boiling sage clears heaviness of thought. The neighbor nods, claiming mint tea saved her from a week of sleepless nerves. Both nod gravely, exchanging the kind of knowing looks people reserve for shared experience. A quirky scene unfolds near a wooden shed. A young farmhand shakes out a bundle of dried chamomile so vigorously that half the petals drift into the air like sleepy confetti. His grandmother scolds him for wasting the good blossoms. He shrugs and claims the drifting petals calm the chickens. The grandmother rolls her eyes so hard you can almost hear it. You smile and wander deeper toward a stone oven, where a family prepares warm drinks for the evening. A pot bubbles gently with water, barley grains, and a few sprigs of mint. The father dips a ladle and offers his daughter a small sip. She smacks her lips thoughtfully and announces it tastes like warm grass. He laughs and tells her it will help her sleep. Historians still argue whether barley water truly eased restlessness, or whether families simply found comfort in familiar nighttime rituals. Nearby, an old woman sits on a low stool grinding fennel seeds. The scent is warm, sweet, and lightly spicy. She sprinkles the powder into warm wine, barely a teaspoon, explaining it helps her husband's nerves after long days in the fields. She warns her granddaughter not to overdo the fennel. "Too much tastes like licking a lamp wick," she says. You decide not to test that comparison. Along the path, you see clusters of lavender tied to doorways. Rural, Romans often hung herbs not just for their scent, but as gentle mood setters. A farmer tells you that lavender keeps the house peaceful. Whether that meant fewer arguments or fewer insects is up for debate. Probably both. A humorous moment unfolds when a group of teenagers gather around a small fire with mugs of warm milk and honey. One brags that he added a hint of rose water to impress a girl. His friend tastes it and sputters, whispering, "It tastes like drinking a flower pot." The group laughs, and the boy sighs dramatically, insisting that romance is suffering. Even ancient teenagers were comedians. You continue toward a pasture where a shepherd tends his flock. He carries a small pouch of dried herbs tied with twine. Inside are thyme, mint, and maybe a little rosemary. He admits he smells the pouch before sleep to quiet the noise in his chest. Not fear, he explains, just the weight of long days. He believes the herbs carry the scent of the fields themselves, and that's enough to comfort him. Historians still argue whether these simple rural herb bundles had genuine calming effects beyond aroma. But scent is powerful, familiar scents even more so, and for people living far from the bustle of the city, the earth itself was the pharmacy they trusted most. You approach another cottage, where a mother stirs a pot of warm water, mixed with lemon peel and a pinch of mint. She dips a cloth into the mixture and presses it to her son's forehead. "To cool the mind," she says gently. The boy looks very proud of his cooling mind, and announces he feels wise. His mother smiles indulgently. "Then go help your father," she says. He immediately decides he feels less wise. Typical. A small group gathers around an elder who tells stories about plants growing near crossroads. Some were considered lucky, others were considered unlucky. None were harmful, but people believed certain locations infused plants with night strength. He pulls out a sprig of sage and says it must be picked at dawn for clarity, at dusk for dreams. Whether that's true or just poetic folklore barely matters. It brings people comfort, and comfort is its own medicine. You walk away from the soft glow of the rural homes, the scents lingering on your clothes, sage warmth, mint sharpness, chamomile softness. These practices aren't about escape, they're about grounding, connection, tradition, a way to ease the human heart without changing it. And as the rural path curves gently back toward civilization, Rome draws you into the next quiet corner of belief, where the moon, darkness, and plants took on meanings more magical than scientific. You leave the soft glow of the rural cottages behind and return to a darker stretch of countryside road, where the night sky feels larger than anything Rome could ever build. Out here, the moon hangs low and bright, turning every plant silver at the edges. And in this moonlit quiet, you step into one of the most charming corners of Roman belief, the world of moon-touched plants. Nothing dangerous, nothing spellbinding, just the gentle superstition that herbs harvested at specific phases of the moon carried different strengths, different moods, different energies. A mix of folklore, ritual, and the very human desire to believe that timing matters. A mainstream fact, Romans, especially rural families, sometimes harvested herbs in connection with lunar cycles. Not for intoxication, not for visions, but because the moon symbolized purity, clarity, and guidance. Plants gathered under moonlight were thought to be cooler, calmer, and better suited for soothing remedies. You follow a narrow path between olive trees until you spot a pair of figures kneeling in a garden, lit by a soft wash of moonlight. A mother and her teenage daughter trim mint leaves quietly, placing them in a cloth pouch. The mother explains that mint harvested under a bright moon keeps its coolness longer. The daughter nods solemnly, clearly cherishing the ritual. Whether the moon actually helps preserve mint or not, the peaceful moment feels sacred. A quirky scene unfolds nearby. An old man sits with a basket of rosemary sprigs, gripping them like he's teaching them manners. He explains to his neighbor that rosemary plucked at moonrise remembers better. The neighbor raises an eyebrow. The old man insists he's serious. Rosemary's ancient reputation for memory made people believe the moon boosted its power. The neighbor eventually shrugs and says, "If it helps you remember where you left your sandals, then good." The old man laughs. "If only." You keep walking, and the night grows softer, quieter. The scent of sage drifts through the air as a young couple sits beside a stone wall, tying dried leaves into small bundles. They say sage picked at full moon helps quiet the spinning mind. Whether that's true or simply comforting folklore hardly matters, they believe, in the ritual. And the ritual gently shapes their mood. Historians still argue whether lunar harvest traditions were widespread or limited to pockets of rural communities. The texts are inconsistent. Some Roman writers mention moon cycles casually. Others treat them as poetic background noise. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, a belief that blended practical gardening with a touch of cosmic charm. A woman in a nearby orchard carries a lantern and a basket of chamomile. She tells you she collects the blossoms only after the moon has risen high enough to touch the petals. She insists it makes the tea smoother. You sniff a handful of blossoms and detect the same chamomile scent as usual, but you're not about to ruin her magic. She grins knowingly anyway, saying, "Whether it works or not, the night makes it feel like it does." You move toward a fig grove where an older woman sits grinding night-harvested herbs with a stone pestle. The paste smells cool and floral. She spreads it onto cloth strips, explaining they're meant to calm the heart when tied near the bed. One of her sons walks by and mutters, It calms your heart because you're tired from staying up all night picking plants. She swats his arm with the gentlest possible annoyance. A humorous moment arrives when you pass a group of children playing near a patch of thyme. One claims thyme picked under the waning moon helps you run faster. He demonstrates by sprinting 2 meters before tripping over a root. The others cheer like he just won the Olympic Games. Child logic transcends millennia. You notice a small shrine tucked between 2 cypress trees. A tiny altar dedicated to Diana, goddess of the moon. A clay bowl holds sprigs of lavender, sage, and bay. A woman kneels beside it, whispering a simple prayer for calm sleep. She ties a piece of lavender to a string and hangs it around her neck. "The moon keeps watch," she murmurs. The belief comforts her. That's the point, not any chemical effect. Further on, you meet a farmer rubbing moon-picked lemon balm between his fingers to release scent. He claims the aroma helps his mind untangle after long days. He invites you to smell it. The fragrance is fresh, clean, and gentle like a cool hand on your forehead. Sometimes that's enough healing for anyone. Historians still argue whether moonlight rituals originated as practical agricultural timing or as emotional tradition. Plants can indeed feel different at night, cooler, softer, more fragrant. And humans feel different at night too, states of mind shifting with starlight, quiet, and the absence of daily noise. You continue walking, letting the night wind brush your skin. The path glows faintly under the moon, and the scents of mint, lavender, sage, and lemon balm follow you. None of this is mystical. None of it is intoxicating. It's just the human desire to anchor the chaos of life to something steady in the sky. And without announcing anything, the road gently curves back toward Rome, where foreign ships and merchants are bringing new scents and stranger substances into the city. You follow the moonlit road back toward the city until the landscape shifts again. Olive trees give way to rooftops, stone walls, and the distant hum of activity. You're approaching one of Rome's busiest thresholds, the trade route warehouses. This is where goods from across the known world arrive on wagons, ships, and caravans. Strange powders, fragrant resins, curious plants, rare minerals, and materials Romans weren't always sure how to classify. Some were medicines, some were spices, some were incense, and some were simply oddities that earned mysterious reputations they probably didn't deserve. Tonight, you're stepping into the world of trade route oddities, where imported substances caused whispering, fascination, wild overstatements, and the occasional neighbor insisting, "Don't sniff that, my cousin," said it makes you see goats. None of these imports were actually psychoactive. But rumors? Those traveled faster than the cargo ships. A mainstream fact. Rome's trade network connected Europe, Africa, Arabia, India, and even distant parts of Asia. That meant ships arrived carrying exotic woods, strange dried plants, aromatic gums, colored powders, and fragrance materials no Roman farmer had ever seen. People treated these imports with a mix of awe and confusion, leading to imaginative interpretations. As you approach the warehouse district, the air thickens with new aromas. The first is sharp and resinous, likely frankincense or pine gum spilled during unloading. The second is sweet and floral, maybe cassia bark. The third is earthy and unfamiliar, like damp wood mixed with spice. Everything smells foreign, intriguing, and just different enough to get the imagination buzzing. A line of workers carries crates off a ship moored at the Tiber. One man drops a box by accident. It cracks open, spilling shiny yellow pellets. The overseer sighs dramatically. "Another batch of sun tears," he mutters. You crouch to smell one. It's just a resin from Arabia, likely used for incense. The workers claim it warms the mind, though they admit it mostly just makes rooms smell expensive. A quirky moment happens as 2 dock boys poke a bundle of dried leaves tied with string. One claims the leaves come alive at night. The other says they smell like lightning. You lean in. They smell like oregano. Good oregano, but still oregano. Someone clearly hyped this shipment to make it sound magical. You wander toward a merchant displaying a tray of powders in bright colors: red, saffron yellow, deep purple, chalk white. Some are dyes, some are cosmetics, some are ground spices. The merchant, ever the salesman, claims the purple powder sharpens intuition. You smell it. It's probably crushed beet pigment mixed with something woody. Nothing mind-altering, just exotic and attention-grabbing. Historians still argue whether some of these imported powders gained reputations because of real effects or because foreign goods always felt mysterious. The written accounts are inconsistent and often exaggerated, like ancient product reviews written by overly dramatic influencers. Next, you approach a stall where a merchant arranges small jars of what he calls desert stones. Inside each jar is a collection of tiny brown lumps. He claims they're heated by the sun's dreams, which you suspect is poetic code for, I don't know what these are, but they smell interesting. When heated over coals, the stones release a soft, resinous scent somewhere between honey and pine. Not intoxicating, just pleasant and unfamiliar. Nearby, a sailor unloads a sack of dried flower buds from India. The buds are stiff and aromatic, smelling like cloves. A passing customer sniffs one and claims it makes his tongue tingle. The sailor laughs. That's just the spice, he says. Use it on meat, not your mood. Still, the tingle is enough for rumors to start. A humorous moment unfolds as a dock worker shows off a bag of bright red seeds from Africa. He insists they give bravery if you chew them. His friend tries one, chews thoughtfully, then admits he feels exactly the same. The first worker nods gravely and says, "That's because you're already brave." They both laugh loudly enough to startle a nearby goat. Further into the warehouse, you find jars of aromatic wood shavings, sandalwood, cedar, and other fragrant imports. A merchant rubs a shaving between his hands, releasing a warm, buttery scent. He says some customers burn the wood to clear sorrow, though he admits the real effect is probably just the comfort of smell and ritual. You agree quietly. Another merchant displays bundles of mysterious dried plants tied with silk thread. He warns onlookers not to touch them with bare hands, not because they're dangerous, but because they crumble instantly, and he's tired of sweeping. Their scent is faintly floral, barely detectable. Yet buyers believe these delicate imports carry air from faraway lands. A poetic idea that alone was worth a few coins. You walk past a table holding small clay jars of resin infused with rare spices. One jar smells smoky and sweet, like toasted sugar. The seller claims the resin opens the spirit to deep thought. You suspect it simply smells comforting, like the ancient equivalent of lighting a fancy candle on a stressful evening. Historians still argue whether Roman fascination with foreign goods came from genuine medical experimentation or from social status. Exotic imports were expensive. Owning them made people feel important, worldly, elevated in mood by association alone. As you leave the warehouse district, the scents trail after you spice, resin, sweet woods, faint floral notes. Nothing mind-bending, nothing dangerous. Just the gentle thrill of encountering something strange and new. And without pause or heading, Rome guides you into the next layer of imagination, where scholars debate and sometimes wildly disagree about what these ancient substances truly meant. You leave the humming warehouse district behind, the foreign scents fading as the city settles back into its familiar blend of stone, dust, and warm night air. The path curves toward a quieter quarter, where scholars, students, and scribes often gather courtyards shaded by vines, small libraries with wax tablets stacked like sleepy bricks, and benches worn smooth by centuries of thoughtful sitting. This is where Rome argues with itself, where theories swirl like incense, where tiny fragments of evidence spark enormous debates. Tonight, you're stepping into the place where historians ancient and modern try to understand what Romans actually felt when they used herbs, fumes, balms, spices, and rituals. And spoiler, they argue about it constantly. A mainstream fact, ancient texts rarely describe intoxication as we understand it today. They describe calming, soothing, numbing, heating, cooling, focusing, and sometimes loosening the mind, but almost never wild, altered states. Still, scattered descriptions, poetic metaphors, and exaggerated stories created centuries of confusion. You cross into a small courtyard where a group of students sit around an elderly teacher. Lamps flicker softly, illuminating scrolls and tablets. The teacher is mid-lecture, tapping a stylus against a wooden board. Some say Romans inhaled temple fumes to see visions, he declares. But truly did they? Or did they simply believe the gods whispered louder in quiet places? The students murmur, half studious, half sleepy. One scribbles notes, another doodles a horse. A third raises his hand and insists he once fainted in a crowded bathhouse from the heat alone. The teacher sighs. Yes, heat does that, not divine vapors. A small joke, gently delivered. You sit nearby, listening as the class debates the famous accounts of priestesses entering holy trances. Some argue the trances were symbolic or theatrical. Others think they were emotional responses to ritual, incense, and expectation. Historians still argue whether certain sacred fumes, like burning laurel or myrrh, created subtle effects, or whether the rituals themselves induced psychological shifts. Next, you wander into a small porch where two philosophers are deep in conversation. One insists Roman spiced wines were far stronger than modern people realize. The other shakes his head confidently. No, our sources are clear. They watered their wine. They flavored it. They diluted strong herbs. They go back and forth, citing ancient writers who described laughing wine, heavy wine, and dream wine. You suspect these terms were poetic, not medicinal. After all, even modern people describe coffee as life-saving, wine as brain fuel, and tea as a hug in a cup. We exaggerate. So did they. A quirky moment unfolds at a nearby bench where two scholars dramatically unroll a scroll covered in plant descriptions. One points to a badly drawn herb and says, "See? This proves Romans used moon-blooming flowers for altered states." His colleague squints and replies, "That looks like a carrot." They argue, loudly, passionately, incorrectly. Eventually, they decide to blame the poor drawing skills of whichever ancient writer composed the scroll. You continue walking and come across a man copying text onto a wax tablet. He mutters under his breath. Some say poppy made the mind drift. Others say it made you sleep. Others say it made you sneeze. He shakes his head. No consensus. He taps the stylus thoughtfully before adding, "Maybe it simply tasted terrible." You want to give him an award for honesty. Nearby, a pair of younger scholars heatedly debate whether imported spices had special powers. One claims certain Indian aromatics were believed to excite the spirit. The other insists this was marketing invented by merchants who wanted to sell expensive goods. Both have points. Historians still argue whether these rare spices were genuinely valued for effects or simply for status. A humorous moment arrives when a student bursts into the courtyard holding a jar of resin. "Master, this made my cousin fall asleep instantly." The teacher examines the jar and sniffs it. "This is beeswax," he says flatly. The student blinks. Then, "Why did he fall asleep?" The teacher pats the air dismissively. "Because he was tired." Lesson learned. As you move toward a library alcove, you overhear two scribes discussing the famous descriptions of dream temples. One says sleep-induced visions were divine messages enhanced by calming herbs. The other thinks worshippers simply slept deeply in quiet, warm rooms after long days of work. The first scribe says, "But dreams felt powerful." The second replies, "Dreams always feel powerful." Hard to argue with that. You step into the library where shelves groan with scrolls. A scholar sits at a desk surrounded by notes. He waves you over, without looking up. "People today think Romans were constantly experimenting with substances," he says. But the evidence shows the opposite. He taps a line of text. They used herbs to soothe, oils to comfort, wine to relax, incense to focus. That's all. He pauses. But imagination fills gaps, and gaps are plentiful. You nod, absorbing the calm authority. Still, he continues. Stories grow. Myths spread. A few poetic descriptions become entire legends. He leans closer. No ancient writer ever said, "Romans got extremely high." But centuries later, people love a good story. Another scholar nearby interrupts. "But what about the temples at Delphi?" The first scholar groans. "That was Greece, not Rome." They argue for a while. You slip away quietly. Historians still argue whether Roman society distinguished clearly between emotional calm, spiritual openness, and light sensory effects from scented rituals. The lines blur easily. After all, being relaxed can feel like drifting. Feeling safe can feel like floating. And certain scents, lavender, frankincense, basil, and more naturally soften the mind. You step back outside, and the night feels thoughtful, softened by the scent of parchment and resin. Rome wasn't a city chasing mind-bending experiences. It was a city chasing comfort through scents, rituals, herbs, warmth, and story. And with no pause, no reset, the city guides you toward your final descent. The quiet, ordinary things Romans did to relax. The little escapes woven into daily life. You leave the scholar's quarter behind, stepping once more into the familiar rhythm of Rome's night. The air is softer now, quieter, as if the city itself is beginning to exhale. You've walked through fumes and festivals, temples and taverns, steam rooms and spice stalls, and now finally, you drift into the gentlest layer of Roman life. Not the exotic imports, not the whispered rumors, not the rituals or theories or debates, just the quiet, everyday escapes. Because for all the myths and misunderstandings, the truth is simple. The things Romans used to soften their days were ordinary, safe, familiar, human. The same kind of comforts you could find now: warm drinks, scented spaces, calming routines, and small sensory pleasures that made the world feel less heavy. A mainstream fact: most Romans relied on mundane comforts to manage stress: warm milk with honey, diluted wine, herbal teas, scented lamps, gentle massage oils, quiet evening walks, shared stories, and long conversations with friends. No highs, no mind-bending moments, just little rituals that made life gentler. You pass a row of apartment balconies where families sit in the night breeze. One woman leans over her rail, holding a small clay cup of warm spiced water. The steam rises, carrying the scent of basil and lemon peel. She isn't trying to alter her mind, she just likes the feeling of warmth sliding through her chest. Her neighbor waves from across the alley, raising his own cup of mint tea. Roman bonding, ancient and relatable. Two men sit on low stools, sharing roasted nuts and watered wine. They talk about work frustrations, family obligations, and the small joys of payday. One claims that a warm bath untangles the mind, and his friend nods, saying the same about evening walks. Historians still argue whether Romans truly sought physical effects from these habits, or whether they simply valued the emotional calm they brought. A quirky little scene unfolds outside a tiny workshop, where a potter shapes clay by lamplight. He has hung bundles of herbs, lavender, sage, and chamomile from the rafters. Not for mysticism, not for medicine, just for the smell. He says it helps him focus when he works late. His apprentice admits he likes the scent because it stops the clay from smelling like damp socks. Practical magic. As you move down the street, a baker's shop still glows warm from the oven. A young couple stands nearby, sharing a small loaf sweetened with fennel seeds. They laugh softly, leaning shoulder to shoulder. He teases her for liking the seeds because they make her feel poetic. She responds that they make him feel less grumpy. Both explanations are true enough. You turn a corner and find a small gathering friends sitting together on woven mats. One plays a soft tune on a flute. Another rubs scented oil onto her wrists. Rosemary and citrus, sharp but soothing. The air around them feels peaceful. They aren't chasing altered states, just connection, conversation, the comfort of being known. Nearby, a family prepares for sleep. A mother sprinkles a few drops of lavender-infused oil onto a cloth beside her children's bed. "For good dreams," she whispers. It's the same phrase 1,000 mothers have spoken in 1,000 eras, with 1,000 different scents. Then comes a humorous moment. A man proudly displays a clay jar of clarity powder he bought earlier, claiming one sniff makes him brilliant. His wife gently reminds him he once confused the laundry basket with the firewood bin. He shrugs and says, "The powder is a work in progress." She rolls her eyes affectionately and tousles his hair. Another household burns a pinch of rosemary to scent the room. Not for visions, not for excitement, just to make their tiny apartment feel fresh, lively, and a little more hopeful. The scent drifts into the street, soft and familiar. A musician sits on the steps of a small shrine, strumming a lyre in the warm shade. A passerby drops a handful of mint leaves beside him as thanks. The musician crushes one between his fingers and inhales. "Keeps me awake," he says. Not a stimulant, just a refreshing smell that lets him play one more tune. You realize something as you watch Rome settle into its night rituals. People didn't need strong substances to feel uplifted. They needed small comforts, familiar scents, warm cups, soft light, good company. Moments of pause, moments of breath. The shocking ways Romans supposedly got high weren't shocking at all. They were gentle, domestic, ritualistic, human. Their world was heavy, noisy, exhausting, and their escapes were small, steady anchors that kept them afloat. The moon rises higher, lamps dim, the city sighs. And now, as the story winds down, you feel the edges of your own mind soften, guided by the same simple comforts that eased ancient hearts. The night folds around you like a blanket, and now, slowly, we drift into your wind down. Let everything begin to settle now. Let the roads of Rome fade behind you, the warm lamps, the drifting scents, the soft hum of voices. Imagine the city growing quieter with every breath you take, its noise falling away like sand slipping off your hands. You're still walking, but the ground feels softer beneath your feet, as though the stones themselves are cushioning each step. The air cools, the lights dim, the horizon stretches gently out until it becomes nothing but calm, restful darkness. Your breathing slows, your shoulders loosen, your thoughts begin to unthread, one by one, drifting like smoke into the night. Imagine finding a quiet corner, perhaps a small balcony, or a patch of grass warmed by the day's sun. You sit down. The world is still. The air is gentle. You don't need to do anything, solve anything, or remember anything. Not right now. Let the soft fragrances linger just enough to comfort you. Lavender, mint, the faint sweetness of warm honey. Let them fade slowly, each one drifting farther away until only calm remains. Your body feels heavier now, in the way that invites rest. Your eyelids soften, your breath deepens. The night cradles you with quiet hands. There is nothing left to explore, nothing left to follow. Just warmth, stillness, and the slow dimming of everything around you. Let yourself float here. Let the last remnants of Rome dissolve. Let your mind settle into the soft, dark, safe, and unhurried. When you're ready, whenever that is, you can let go fully and rest. The journey is finished. Sleep well.